Beebe, athlete, builder. We have James Barchiesi. Barchiesi's in the house. So I'm in the library, and this is a whole different episode for us. For one, there's no Lucas today. He's under the weather, but he'll be back next time. And by and large, or 100% of the time, we've had athletes and coaches on the show. And when I was talking to James before we turned everything on, I said, when you're dialed into your philosophy, you start seeing it everywhere. And I've given the example about how my philosophy transfers to accountants or construction workers, etc. So we're going to put that whole idea into play today. So that's why we have James here for a number of reasons. One, just going over a little bit of his background, and I'll tie it together, I promise. It's not just one long-winded intro. So he's an investment guy by nature, same as me. He has an MBA, and so do I. So when he started off, it's '07, it's Wall Street, and he's doing all the things, right? So he's managing money, he's working for big firm, like I was working for JP Morgan, and next thing you know, by age 25, he's managing $500 million, which is a huge portfolio by any measurement. Fast forward, he starts branching out. There's a little bit of service and working with public service. There's Homeland Security, but then there's also still working with the big Ivy League schools with Wharton, MIT, Princeton, advisory roles, public speaker. Fast forward a few more years, he puts all of it together and creates a whole brand new company called Polymath Partners. And what the deal is there is it's not just an investment firm. There's a legal component, there's a financial component, and there's an investment expertise component. And if you're running a business, and I am, it's much smaller than probably what he's been working with, but any entrepreneur, you're going to have all those issues, all those needs. And as you get bigger and bigger, you have more and more needs. And it gets a little bit clunky when I was at JP Morgan working with a CPA from here, an investment guy here, a trust advisor there, an insurance person there. And if you can provide some continuity, it's a lot more seamless. It's a lot more efficient. It helps the entrepreneur who wants to just run their business. They don't want to deal with any other crap, right? They like to run their business. So I have James on. How did I meet him? So it all goes back to that Navy SEAL swim out in New York. So how do you tie all this together? Well, he's still, physically an athlete by nature. So there's a swimming component. He's done triathlons. There's martial arts and also fencing. So he put it all together. He's a bit of a ninja in the water who also has a brain that can run businesses and work and consult there. So in talking with him, you learn about his philosophies, and we're not going to get into that, but he talks about building your mindset, building your body, building your relationships, and building your profession. And that's how we're going to tie it all together with Athlete Builder, because it's not just the guy that sits behind the desk. It's the guy that still wants to be physical and lead his family and lead his business. And that's why we have him on today. We're going to go over a lot of the lessons that you see, whether it's in the military group, an athletic group, or a business group. There's so many transferable skills, and we're going to talk about that. So, James, long-winded, but thanks for being on the show today. Glad to have you.
Thank you for having me, Jim, and it's a pleasure. I appreciate the introduction, and I love the part about being somebody more than behind a desk. As you see, I'm sitting behind a desk right now, which is probably the hardest thing I've done all week because I'm ADD by nature and I can't sit still to save my life. So I had to do quite a few breathing exercises before to sit still. But I'm digging this and I love it, and thank you for having me on.
It was clearly humble, saying you need to do breathing exercises just to be on the show with me. So, someone who does public speaking and ran for Congress, he's not new to being in front of folks and making an argument. So, we'll be able to, I'm sure you'll do just fine today. Yeah. So, East Coast guy, Pennsylvania guy, right? Essentially.
Yeah.
And you went the finance route, same, very similar to me, but you felt like a bit compelled to evolve. Before we get into that, though, just briefly talk about your life in the financial world from college to now, just a brief overview, more than what I just gave.
Sure. So I mean, it was not a straight path as most people's paths aren't, right?
Right.
I say it probably took me 37 years, and I'm 41 this year. It probably took me 37 years to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I'm glad I did. I started out, and I've always loved business. So, I mean, I can remember when I was a kid, I was 5 years old and 6 years old, and I was just fascinated with the idea of business. I remember my first business was I started getting all the neighborhood kids in there to paint rocks and make paperweights that we tried to sell to all the neighbors' parents. I remember my brother and we started a return address label business that my dad lent us the money for to print return address labels. And up through high school, I ended up getting calls from people who are asking me for return address labels from this business that I started when I was in my teens. And so I love the idea of business. I love the idea of creating, and the idea that you can take what's in your mind and you can make it a reality. That was the coolest part, right? Like I had a big imagination as a kid, couldn't sit still, and this was a way to really sink my teeth into that. Fast forward, I'm in high school, and honestly, in high school, I was really struggling with just kind of finding my place. And I ended up, latching onto a program that was introduced to me in my high school, which was a bridge program with Marist College. And I ended up starting college a bit early, and was doing my bachelor's degree, and went all over the place. Did liked political science, loved the idea of economics. Really got into politics and economics and the blend between the two. And then, I had two trajectories I could choose from. One was I was thinking of going to law school. The other was I was thinking of going to business school. And, my love for business at the time really kind of overruled and my attention and my focus at the time, right? I felt like that was something where I got a lot of, it energized me. So I went into that, did my MBA, worked in a management rotational at a bank, and I was doing a private banking management rotational, finished my MBA, and got a job on Wall Street. I was working for a broker dealer, and within the first 6 months of working for the broker dealer, we walked right into the recession. And I remember the analyst on the floor coming out and saying, "Don't worry, keep buying covered calls. There's no way Bear Stearns will ever go out of business. There's no way that anybody will default on their mortgage." And so I was there, and at that moment, I started looking for another job. And one thing led to another. I was actually trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I needed health insurance at the time. And very good family friend, his name is Michael Walsh. He worked for New York Presbyterian Hospital, and he gave me a job. I was actually doing security work in the night shift so I could have health insurance. And I was doing that, and I'm sitting there. I got my MBA. I just left this Wall Street job. I'm sitting there. I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. And one night, there's like a pension meeting for like all the employees and all their benefits. And one of the guys is like, "Can you go with us and do this meeting?" I said, "Sure, why not?" So I go to the meeting, and this guy presents about the pension plan, and I started asking about how the pension plans are structured, what are the actual funds, how are they going to map them over from the previous carriers, and after the meeting, the guy who presented, he comes up to me and he's like, "Oh, because you're like a pretty well-read, investment, you must read a lot about investments and stuff, or interested." And I'm like, "Yeah," I'm like, I have a Series 7. I'm like, I said, "I'm a registered rep." I said, "I did my MBA in finance." So he goes, "Well, when you decide you want a real job, like not that, like you want to work more than part-time at night," he's like, "Come see me." And I said, "No," I said, "I don't want to be working in this industry." And, a couple days later, I picked up a phone. I called him. He's a great guy. And, that was the only interview I ever had with this man. He hired me and said, had me meet with two other healthcare systems and said, if they like you, we're hiring you. They hired me, and I worked for them for a little over 4 years, and worked with Lenox Hill Hospital, New York Presbyterian Hospital, Ivy Steel, a whole bunch of different pension funds, retirement plans, defined benefit, deferred comp plans. And then after that, decided to go out on my own was actually doing some graduate work at NYU, was learning some things, was working as a research sponsor at Lehigh University. And, it all kind of just came together. I decided to start my own thing. And, one of the things I was always passionate about was the ability of leveraging finance and business to create. and systems that can add value. And it was a weird thing. It kind of went into, we started this business with the idea of managing investments and providing advice. Um, that evolved into us providing advice for businesses. And eventually, I was working with Princeton-based venture fund Innovation Garden, where they had hired us to work on handling the asset management of the portfolio. So they were investing in startup companies. We were managing the portfolio. And I realized that the biggest way that we could be impactful wasn't through managing just the investments and the deal structure of the investments, but it was actually helping to help these entrepreneurs create enterprise value. And so that's what we did. We started looking at, well, what are the areas, that impact areas that are in a business that are traditionally overlooked that can create resiliency and value? We started to contract out and get those services for those companies. And, kind of fast forward, that became the underlying ethos of Polymath Partners. It was this idea of integrated professional services in order to bridge the gap between just transactional relationships and creating value. And what that really means is, how do you take a cost center? How do you take something that is not necessarily a mechanism for value creation and make it a mechanism for value creation, tease out the opportunities and create a mindset shift in the entrepreneur, create a mindset shift in the actual way that you approach your business and how you approach ultimately how that also translates into life, right? How do you create enterprise value within yourself? How do you create enterprise value in a business is all the same thing. It's about building resiliency, identifying opportunities, and treating yourself like a portfolio. And so, that's kind of where that came from.
That's a very comprehensive answer, right? And for me, I like a lot of that because I understand um, all the financial jargon. When I finished my MBA at Purdue, I started in '08, finished in '09, and the placement rate was about 94, 95%. And so it's right in the middle of that housing bubble that you were beginning in '07. And the placement rate from the master's in finance group ended up being 24%. So it was very, very painful, but still was able to network and find a job and was able to create some value there. That's how I got the job. And I hear what you're saying with Polymath Partners and also yourself. If I'm looking at a team or a coach, it's the same deal. So if you're looking at DeBoer down at Alabama, he's an entrepreneur, right? He's running his own business. The whole Alabama football program, which deals with revenue coming in from tickets and sales and um, donors, et cetera. And then there's the costs, right, of personnel. Then there's your assets with the players, but also the brand and all that stuff. You're doing the exact same thing. And can he create enough value on his offense, on his defense to help that team win? And you're doing the same thing with polymath, but even if you're in an individual sport like wrestling or golf, it's the same deal, right? There's still revenue that comes in, there's still a cost. Can this program provide enough value where we win? And it might be win that you win a championship, or we make everybody from our team graduates with a degree and they'll have jobs. Not everyone from a D3 or D2 school goes on to the pros, not even D1 schools, right? Can you create enough value in yourself? And hopefully that when you're done playing the sports, you apply the same lessons learned in your next step, right? Whether it's running your family, working with your family, in your faith, in a nonprofit or some kind of business. And you mentioned that you've been active your whole life. You said the ADHD, but you've been active your whole life with swimming and other sports. Talk about how some of those lessons learned earlier on help build your identity today.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's very interesting. And I'm going to preface this with, I think there was a solid decade of, and I think everybody, if they haven't gone through it, they will go through it in life, right? Where you overweight into one area at the expense of another. And then you realize that you're burning that capacity out in that domain. We'll talk about domains in a little bit. But for me, that there was probably a 10-year gap, maybe even 13, 14-year gap, where that was the case. And ironically, if you look at my schedule today at 41 years old, and you look at my schedule when I was probably 13 years old, they probably look the same in a lot of ways. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about like your happiest time in your life as a child is packed with things to do. You're doing a ton of things. You have a ton of responsibilities you don't even realize you have in different ways, but you're enjoying it.
Mm.
And it's new and it's also changing, it's dynamic, you're growing, right? So it's about replicating the environment of growth as an adult that you have as a kid that creates the energy to keep going and to create value. And so, for me, again, I was a super, super hyperactive kid, and I had a lot of diverse interests. Um, my mom and dad, they were great about they tried to figure out ways to keep me engaged. They figured in the beginning it was frustrating because I was always going, and then I think they were like, okay, well, let's just let him do what he's doing and put him in things. So I remember as a kid I was doing school, piano, karate, fencing, training for triathlons, have my business that I was running that I decided to do on my own. And I still found time. I was playing with my brother. My brother and I built the business together that we had. I was doing all these different things. And, there was things going on in my life as a kid that, any kid, right? Like my parents moved to different places. There was all the things that happen in life. But because I had those kind of foundational things that gave me purpose and that gave me an outlet to decompress and recharge in different areas of my life, it created an ecosystem that allowed me to be very resilient and allowed me to be able to be persistent. Now, the one thing you're missing as a kid usually is the goal piece, right? Someone else is looking at it. They're teasing out what they think you're going to like and what you're going to want to do. They're kind of regurgitating it back to you in the format of something that maybe looks like something that's aligned with your interest, right? You're being told, not necessarily doing the telling to some extent. And I think as an adult, we lose that, right? So we get to be in the captain's seat. So what do? We don't do anything. We do some of the things that are the low hanging fruit, but we don't do the things that take a lot of brain power usually because it's like, why bother? It's like, I'm an adult. I don't have to do this. So we get in this mindset where no one's telling us to do it. So why should we do it?
Mm-hmm.
And, so as a kid, I was involved, like you said, I was involved in a few different sports. My day looked like I said, I would go running with my dad would go over there and bike and pace me, and I would go running and do triathlons. I would wake up in the morning and do swim team at the local swim team. I would go over there and I would go to school. And, then I'd come home at around 3-4 o'clock. I want to do my business thing. I'd go out and knock on doors to try to sell return address labels or whatever crazy idea I had at the time. And I think that's kind of what my day to day looks like now.
Gotcha. There are a number of points there I really appreciate. One, when you talk about moving forward with goals or anything in life, there is that sustainability piece. You can only be in pain for so long, grinding through something you can't stand for this potential for some outcome later. Like you might want to
Yeah.
win this thing or get this degree, but if you hate it all along the way, that's really a short term focus. So having the
Yeah.
sustainability piece is going to be important. We talk about our 6 core values. Enjoyment's one of them. You have to actually love what you're doing a little bit. Now,
Yeah.
you also when you point out, 13, like you're learning because you're in school. You're also running a business, so there's a business component there. There's piano, so there's learning, but also some creativity. Then there's the physicality of triathlons and then hand to hand with karate. So I know that if I'm pissed off or having a shitty day, I can go work out and feel better. I also know that
Yeah.
if I'm grinding all the time trying to push my weights up or perform better in the gym, that can be kind of grinding. If I just go and just work on the business, that's a chance for me to relax from the physical component.
Yeah.
Don't you think though that there's some seasons of your life where for you to push forward, you have to be out of balance a little bit. Like if you go into the military, you're in boot camp, you're away from your family, you're out of balance, right? You're concentrated in this one area. Or if you're in school all the time. So if you're a full-time athlete in college, there's school and then there's your athletics, and not much else, not much personal life. It's only sustainable though for so long. After a while, you're going to be so, like you said, out of balance in one direction. You're going to revert to that mean and probably past. I know people that get done with sports like, hey, I don't want to do that shit anymore. I want it to be balanced. I've neglected my faith. I neglected my relationships. I've only had so much time for this. So once you kind of, I don't know, it's almost like you have this midlife crisis. I'm doing this over here. I'm doing this over here. All right, I want this going forward. Don't you think there's some point where either you have an epiphany or you have enough in one direction, you're like, I've had enough. There's got to be some kind of triggering event or some component where, you know what, I want to see what I've seen both sides. What's the next 10 years going to look like? It can't be what I'm doing now. Like you have to make some different
Well,
changes.
well, and I agree with you. I think that that ultimately is the path that 90% of the people in the world take, right? There's a triggering event that brings them to a point where they have to take a look at things and say, hey, how do I reposition? How do I restructure this organization that is me, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to become more effective and be the version that I am, that I've set out to be. But I would say I would respectfully disagree that it's a necessity that you go through that in order to get there. And that's kind of the passion that I have about, especially when mentoring individuals, working either with business owners or working with kids or anybody. I don't think that has to be the case. I think it is the case because it's the natural ebb and flow of our life, of our community, of the way we're educated.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have to. And I'll give you an example. And look, I don't have it. I don't have the I don't have any delusions of grandeur, right? Like I figure this out. I change my routines every 3 weeks. I'm updating, I'm tweaking, I'm tinkering, I'm coming up with new ways to become more effective. I love that process. I've got 75 rituals that go into my week that, kind of help give me guardrails to be able to perform. But I will say this, it's the ruthless commitment to understanding where you are in the world, how you can interact with the world, how you want to interact with the world, and ultimately figuring out the ruthless commitment to figuring out how to have fun and do it in a natural way that fits into your life. So you talk about the person who's in the military, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did not serve in the military. I have a tremendous respect for all those who have. My grandfather was the reason I did the Navy SEAL swim. My grandfather was a UDT diver in World War II in Korea. My brother was in the Navy. My father was retired NYPD. So I recognize there's a tremendous amount of sacrifice and commitment that these individuals make to be able to do what they're doing. There's a tremendous amount of sacrifice athletes make towards the advancement of their physical abilities. But here's the thing. If you take a step back, that doesn't preclude you from, if you understand this is how I operate in life, right? So we're dropped here on this earth.
Mm-hmm.
There's only 4 ways, and it's this simple. We're dropped here on this earth. Doesn't matter what your religious background is, doesn't matter anything. When you open your eyes, there's 4 ways in which you can be impactful on this earth. There's 4 ways in which you can interact with this world. One is through your body, right?
Yep.
You can be physical.
Yep.
It's through fitness, fuel. You can interact physically with the world around you.
Yep.
You can consume the world around you, right? The second one is through your balance, right? You can interact with the people around you. You can allow people to interact with you. The other one is your being, right? You can interact with the world around you by learning and by communicating and learn and teaching, or you can learn and you can grow in your mindset and your knowledge.
Yep.
Or you can go over there and you can grow spiritually, right? Whatever you believe in, you can grow spiritually and identify and try to figure out where you fit into the ether of the world. And then you can create value, whether that's creating value through public service, whether that's creating value as a mother, whether that's creating value as a business owner, whether that's creating value as an officer in the military. But you create something. Those are the 4 things that you can do as a person, right? Just because you start becoming training and you go to boot camp, or just because you go over there and you decide you're going to go over there and become a Super Bowl champion, right? Doesn't mean that you can't do those other things. It starts with recognizing that is the way that you interact with the world, and then making a decision on how you want to interact with the world. So if you say, you know what, I'm in boot camp, but it's important for me to stay connected with family. It's important for me to not lose time because that's going to feed me, right? That's going to fuel me to push forward. It's going to remind me of the reason maybe why I'm serving or the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. You build a routine for it.
Right.
It doesn't have to be complicated.
Nope.
Just start with something, a layer. Hey, I'm going to send a letter every week to mom. I'm going to send a letter every week to dad. I'm going to pick up the phone once a week, and I'm going to make time for every time that I come home from when I serve, maybe to go over there and meet up with a friend, right? Same thing. I do this now. I'm tremendously busy. I have 3 kids. I'm training for this, English Channel relay. I crazily had my midlife crisis and decided I wanted to go to law school part-time while being the CEO or chairman now of a company that has a legal component. And I each week I have a thing on my calendar, and it's express gratitude. And it's write a letter to somebody you care about or reconnect and make plans with someone you care about. It takes 15 minutes. And every week it's a challenge, right? You just don't skip it. It's like, don't skip leg day. Don't skip going over there and looking at your calendar and saying, hey, who haven't I talked to in this much time that I can reach out and just say, hey, how's it going? You want to get together? And that is a mechanism for recovery, even if you don't realize it, because it's feeding a different part of you that needs to be fed in order to give you the drive and the power to do the other things you
do. That's huge. And for so many, me included, there's a precursor step where I think you're going to need to be quiet in your head for a minute systematically, whether it's every day or on Friday or once a week, because you're going to need this realization on your identity. Hey, you know what? I haven't connected with these people. I don't connect with a lot of people. That's missing. I want to fix that. And then you get to come up with a process. Or, hey, I'm connected with these folks, but you pointed out that recently, years past, you were, what did you write here? I'm pursuing excellence in my physical pursuits, but it was leaving me feeling unfulfilled. So it seems like, me included, that every once in a while there needs to be some kind of, hey, just take a breath here. Let's see where everything's going. Is this really where you want to be? So you can have this realization and tap in your identity that, hey, this is a little bit out of balance. I want to address it. And then you have to take the step of, all right, what's my process for addressing it? And I'll try this for the next, 6 weeks. I'm gonna write a letter, like you said, and I don't like that process so much. I'd rather just do a phone call. But,
do.
but at least I'm evolving it so it's sustainable for me. But it's still meeting the issue of I'm not connected with these folks, my family or friends, maybe it's from college or whatever. I want to process so I can feel connected again. It's going to help feed other parts of my soul. But it seems like there's also a component where you need to have some quiet time to kind of figure that shit out.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's part of the biggest challenge. I mean, I struggle with that now too. It is that rapid fire. For me, I'm always going, right? Like, we're going to do this interview. I got class at 9:00 tonight. I'm going to go and do case briefs for like 30 minutes. I'm going to go answer emails from work from earlier. I'm done with my workout stuff. I do that in the morning. And, it's hard to unwind and unplug. And I found I had to find mechanisms to do that. Everyone loves like this idea of meditation and breathing and things like that. I'm a big fan of cold showers,
Yeah.
and getting some of that downtime. I'm a big fan of walks, big fan of walk and talks in the morning, at night, going outside, doing something. For me, being in motion actually helps me clear my head.
Yeah.
Sitting still doesn't work, but you're 100% right. Like, you need to figure out what works for you to give yourself the space to do that. And what I found is it starts with having some of those simple techniques. You actually have to just start with, someone's got to give you some tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone gave me some tools. I read some books. I went over there and I did this myself through trial and error, whatever it was. But there was some tools where it was like, hey, if I do this one thing daily, it gives me a little more headspace.
Yep.
Then I add something else on, it gives me more headspace. And eventually you build, you build capacity, right? You make daily deposits that help you build capacity to think. What's interesting is rituals are a big part of that, right? There's this concept, and they did an analysis and a research about Leonardo da Vinci. We can imagine, based on a company named Polymath Partners, we're pretty interested in the idea. I love idea, polymaths like Leonardo da Vinci or Alexander Hamilton and folks who showed capacity and ability to do things in multiple venues at a level of excellence that it's really hard to understand how they were even able to accomplish that. And it's this idea of automaticity. And I'm probably butchering that, but it's basically the process of automating the things in your life that can be automated through creating muscle memory mentally or physically, and creating rituals or guardrails or things that allow you to then have the freedom to do other things, right? If you know, for me, it's walking, right? In the morning, I can walk, and I know, I can walk. I end up getting through my emails. I pick up a phone and reconnect with someone. I go over there and listen to an audio book. I do these 4 or 5 things. And I realize for me, the walking piece is the most important, because what it does is it gets all that physical energy out that I needed to get out so that my head can focus. And that's just that's just my personality, right? But everyone's got that thing. And it's about discovering what it is and just figuring it out. Some people are amazing at meditation. I wish I could be one of them. But I see people who can sit there and they can be very still and they can really, really dive deep and do that and be religious about it every day, every morning. And leverage that, right? Turn that into something where now you're using that time to do things that are going to help drive some of these other areas.
Yeah, I read Green's book Mastery, and talks about Da Vinci a little bit. So Da Vinci had a complete expertise of the physical body, also artwork. So you also just the chemicals that go into paint. So you put all these things
Yeah.
together. Next thing you know, you can be creative, but it still takes 10 years to become an expert in all these things.
Yeah.
So yeah, overnight he's really good, but it took all these losses along the way. You're right, absolutely, in that when you find something that's deficient, let's say you're swimming, and for me, when I swim, most things are deficient, but maybe it's your kick, and so one, you got to be aware, and then what other processes we're working on your kick. Could be a drill, could be bigger leg strength, maybe you're weak in your core. We got to then hunt for that weakness and then fix it. In a broader in a broader sense, maybe you're trying to find some quiet time in your head. And for me, I like to just sit, but I also like hiking out in the woods. For you, it sounds like hiking or walking is the optimal piece. So the one, you got to be able
Yeah.
to figure, hey, I have an issue here, I have a need, and you can read the books and you can watch the YouTube videos and you can listen to these podcasts. It doesn't really matter until you start doing some things.
Yeah.
I've tried the meditation. I tried the cold therapy. I tried walking. What's sustainable for me and where I get a return on investment on my habit, my system, um my reps is this. So I'm sticking with it. But you still got to go through and get to doing. And I find some folks, they'll read 10 books and I'm like, well, did you learn things? Yeah. Did you put anything into practice? Like, no, I'd just like to read a business book a week. I'm like, well, now you're stupider because you did all the learning, but now you're not applying anything. So now it's worse. So it'd be
Yeah.
worse if you didn't know what to do and then you didn't do anything. But now you know what to do and you're still not doing anything. But
Yeah.
it's the doing that you kind of learn about yourself and what works, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, 100%. I mean, I think that's the biggest part. I mean, and it's that delicate balance between learning and doing. And I feel like, again, rituals play a huge role in creating those trigger points for you to actually, it's go time, and figuring that out. And I mean, and this is the thing. It's, you're not, it's not going to be, it's not going to be perfect,
No.
no matter what you do. My business partner Kyle and I, like we started working with Polymath Partners. We created a product. I mentioned this earlier. It's called Deal Shield. It's basically a safe space for companies to be able to do, who have privately held. If you have a small business or you're an owner operator of a business, you can sell it, protect the asset during the sale. You can increase the tax efficiency so you don't lose money on taxes and you can defer taxes. And you can secure the promissory note and get some guarantee on the promissory note so that you're less at risk of the buyer defaulting on the note. And, we tinkered with this. We went back and forth. We talked about all different ways to do this. We had solved for maybe 60% of it when we actually launched it. And then my business partner and I were like, we're just going to launch it. Like, we're just going to go over there and tell we are going to do this. And because there's nothing that we can do that we will get to a 90 to 97% or 99%. So we decided on what's the confidence interval in the creation of this product that we need to achieve.
That's huge.
Where then
That's
it's go
huge nerd speak for our scenario analysis. So I love that shit. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, and it's the same. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. 100%. It's like basically like, hey, it's go time. When is it go time? Like when deciding when you've had enough of like just sitting there spinning your wheels and getting into okay, let's do it.
Love that. So Ray Dalio talks about that all the time, about that feedback loop, and it's the logo on his books. How
Yep.
and then working with the SEALs, you'll hear them say a good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. So even launching this podcast, I think in the first episode, I'm like, hey, today's gonna be pretty good, but our 10th episode is gonna be better. And a year from now, it's gonna be better. We're gonna figure some more things out. And in launching a book, the 2.0 version is gonna be better because I'm gonna get people coming back and saying, hey, this part kind of sucked. This part was great. Tweak this, and I'm like, great. So I think for me as a business owner, if someone comes at me and says, hey, this isn't going so well, my ego's a little bit exposed, but the more I can be coachable in my business or coachable as an athlete or as an employee or when you're consulting someone, it's easier to get that information and that feedback loop and then apply it so you're at that next iteration. And if I can be at 10 iterations in 6 months when everybody else is at one iteration in 6 months, then I'm winning as an athlete,
Yep.
or I'm winning as a business, or I'm winning as a husband. Hey, I can do this a little bit better, right? Talk about like when you're consulting your clients or working with your employees or when you're a kid yourself being coached, how being coachable and working with people is going to be critical, because some people have some egos, me included, and those get in the way sometimes.
Oh, I mean, I was not the easiest. Probably, I definitely wasn't the easiest kid to coach, and I definitely wasn't the easiest employee to coach. I definitely wasn't the easiest boss, and that kind of got down to a whole thing. I didn't. It was an underappreciation for the value until it wasn't. Right, you hit a wall, and I think this happened. You have a lot of if you have a lot of energy, and obviously you're doing this, you're doing a lot of things in life. You get a lot of energy, and you feel like you could take on the world, right? You could spit fire when you want to, and now you go over there and you're hitting this wall, and then you realize at some point in life you can't actually you can do those things up to a point, but then you realize that there's this other power, which is this multiplier effect, right? And I started, I liked the idea, I love the story you asked in one of our, kind of talk, you had asked me some questions before the interview, just like things to think about. And one of those about like your favorite superhero, right? And, I think about who it was when I was a kid, which was Superman, right? Love Superman.
Sure.
He could do everything. He
Yes.
could do anything. Invincible. He's powerful, right? As I got older, it was Iron Man and Professor X. And it's like, why? And it's like, well, because they hit a point, they could do a lot, right? X-Men, Professor Xavier, he's this Omega level mutant. He can do all these things. But what was his true power? Bringing together powerful people to drive reform and drive creation and drive a better world. What was Iron Man's, right? He created the arc reactor and he created all these things in $1 billion company and he could do all these things. But what he became known for is the creation of the Avengers. So he took what he learned and he figured out, how do I tease out the things that I'm good at? How do I eliminate the things that I'm bad at by complementing this with people who are better than me at these things? Let me listen to them. Let me internalize that and allow that to help me become a better leader and focus on being the multiplier. And I think that's what it is, right? I had a hard time until I started my own company figuring that out. And even when I did, like, it was this hard thing. Like, you're sitting there and you want to do everything. And then you realize you don't want to do everything, right? If you're an owner operator of a business, that's the loop you get caught into that we try to help you break, which is you have this constant thing that there's no one else who can do it better than you, and there's no one else who's going to do it or care as much as you do. And the more that you believe that fallacy, the more likely you are to not have a business that can grow beyond you. You create that, again, enterprise value within yourself, enterprise value in your business. Well, if you're the only one who can do it and you drop dead, your business is dead.
There's no business.
If you're an athlete and you're performing and everything's based on you, right?
Right.
But you're somebody who also created a team environment where when you hurt yourself or when you're not able to perform at your best, they can pivot and they can adapt. Your team's still going to win. And so it was that kind of gave me this kind of eye opener about like the team element that I was missing as a kid and being coachable. That I probably started to. I feel like I'm just now starting to get the hang of that. Like this is not, this is a new thing for me. It's
Got it.
trying to keep the ego in check. Uh, biting your tongue when someone wants to do something different than the way that you've done it or want to do it. Even in my role, like taking a step back, I'm not CEO of the company anymore. My business partner is. I'm in a strategic role. My role is to kind of support what he's doing and support those decisions. And some days that's really easy, and some days that's really fucking hard. And but it all works. It all works. So
You know, there's a piece that you mentioned there about, Xavier is obviously super smart, but he also brought other folks together for this team, right? So, and you talked about, what he's good at, what he's not good at. And when I talk to athletes, I bring it back to the whole business thing. And I say that you need to know, and if you don't know, you need to ask, what is your competitive advantage or what are your competitive advantages as an athlete? And so if you're in football, maybe you're the best tackler, but maybe you're not great at pass coverage, right? If you're on defense. And if you're on offense, it could be that you're great at blocking, but you're not great at running. And given my size, I was never going to touch the ball. I was always going to be somewhere away from it, right? But even in more of an individual sport like swimming or golf, there's still a bit of a team component because there's other people there. So if you don't know what you're best at, you need to talk to other coaches on the field or within your sport or even in your own company and say, hey man, what am I great at? And what do you need me to be great at? So you might be, hey, I need you to be great at tackling and shutting down the run, but I also need you to make sure that everyone is in position because you're the one, the film really well, you're really intelligent. So not just this physicality piece on football, but you also need to make sure everybody's in position. And when people are down or they don't know what's going on, you need to be my voice on the field as maybe a third role. If I'm in the if I'm at the bank, I hated the small little minutia, the attention to detail because my head's all over the place. I wanted to be in front of the client, fixing problems, making a sale, blah blah blah. So I'd ask, what do you guys want me to do? I said, Jim, I want you to close the sale. Okay, fine. Once I bring it back, can you guys get through all the paperwork and all the all the exchanges and all the rollovers and all that shit? Because I hate that shit, right? But you have to ask your boss or your coach, what am I great at and what do you want me to do? And then what is holding me back? What's your limiting factor? And if you can bring those up, what you're great at, you can beat people more. And then your limiting factor is how you get beat. So asking for some help there. And if you're in a support role, hey CEO, what do you need from me? What's going to be where are you going to be? Where's your blind spot where I can make an impact? And what's something I can work on? I think if you're constantly, so you're always analyzing, it sounds like you're always analyzing yourself, but if you can get a couple other folks to help kick in there some information, it probably makes the process a little faster.
well, and 100%. I mean, I think that's a big part of. I think that's a part of. You look at if I had to go over there and say like, what's my strong suit? What's my special skill with things? And I think one of those is a high degree of self awareness that I have a passion for having a high degree of self awareness. So maybe I'm not always the most self aware, but I'm committed to wanting to increase my level of self awareness, whether that's awareness about my body, awareness about my mind, understanding my capacity. Right. Um, I believe that the active listening piece, and that is a huge component, is part of that process, right? So I talk about a lot when we do this, executive evolution, which is about helping elite executives bridge the gap between business mastery and balancing their personal lives and physicality, and how it all works together and there's transferability between the skill sets. And it really comes down to one of those things is that active listening, right? Even if you may be really strong and you're working on your self-awareness, you also have to work on your active listening and receptiveness to other people's perspective. And that cuts both ways. You want to be careful not to,
Yep.
you want to be careful, like not to go over there and your entire identity. And this is where I cut the other way, right? Like my entire identity is not based on anybody else. I was teased as a kid. I was the weird kid. I did this, that. I was always like, I'm going to do my race. And I really don't. And that's why I'm in solo sports, right?
Right.
I wasn't in team sports. I was going to do my race. I'm not trying to beat you. I'm trying to beat myself. And that's always been how I operate. But there is that part of like, in order to continue to beat yourself, in order to excel, you have to know that you have a limiting factor. You have blind spots. You have things that you are incapable of seeing because you're looking from the lens here. They're looking in.
Yep.
And it's about being accepting of how other people's perspectives and being willing to synthesize that. And I think that's the harder part for a lot. It's sometimes really hard for people to take a microscope to themselves without it being crippling. It's also very hard for people to allow the feedback from other people to be synthesized into their self-awareness, especially if what someone else sees is exactly what you're seeing and is kind of doubling down it's validating something that you don't really want to validate, right?
Right. Right.
Um, so I totally agree though, like active, that I think, that level of self-awareness and then that ability to actively listen to others those are the two skills that those are the X factor in your success as an athlete, as an executive, as anybody else. I mean, if you're sitting there and you're swimming, like for me with swimming, that's my thing, right? I know my heart rate. I'm learning my breathing. I know when to push and when to not push. I know when to stop and when to recover. Like I know when to go all in.
Mm-hmm.
I know when not to. And if you're doing endurance racing, that's one of the most important things, right?
Yep.
You need to know how to pace.
Yes.
And but sometimes you don't see what you don't see, right? Someone else is looking and they're like, objectively, they're like, you may think you can pace at this, but I've seen you swim, or I've seen you run, or I've seen you do this, and you've never been able to pace at this.
Right.
So let's break it down and figure out how to do it differently. And you got to be willing to listen to those people, and whether that's in business or life.
Yeah. Yeah. With the swimming thing, and not many know this, but I've been swimming more for that SEAL event next year. And I'm only a few months in, and like you've been swimming for years, so it's different, right? Um, I'm horrible at pace. All I know is grit your teeth and go. And next thing you know, I'm gassed. I'm like, I'm going so hard. I'm like, well, shit. And because the fear is that, well, if I go really slow, I'll just sink. And I'm like, I need to make it to the other edge so I can get my breather, right? And
Yeah.
it's not true. You can go and just coast. And so I'm still learning that piece. So for me, if I'm swimming this lap, it's how fast can I do it? And that's that.
Yeah.
And then when you're swimming in the SEAL swim in New York, it's mile and a half, depending. And I looked up the English Channel. They said it's about 21 miles, but it's more because of the way the current's pushing you around. So it's not linear by any stretch of the imagination. To your point about feedback, I think it's helpful if, let's say, I'm pointing out something where you could work on something. If I could also point out how that I've had that same issue in the past. Here's an example.
Yeah.
I had the same problem. It fucked me up here. And so if I try to work on my awareness and you see all the books I read, it helps me learn more and learn more about myself. And I come across someone else who's not overly aware. I'm like, I look at them like, well, how the fuck could you not know this about yourself? Right. So there's no empathy there. And so that's a huge weakness. And so I don't come at people like that anymore. But you're right. If you can figure out how to point out there's something you can work on and not be offensive and get them to move forward, that's where the artwork goes along with the knowledge. And then one of the things you wrote here, you said, once you understand your environment, the next step is making a conscious decision about how you want to engage with it. That means setting goals in each of these four areas we talked about. So my question is, talk about the environment. The environment, what I'll tell people is, if you're an athlete, show me the 5 people you hang out with the most. Or if you're in business, or if you're in your faith, or let's say at school where you're a school teacher, show me the people you hang out with the most, and I'll show you what your habits are going to be, because the whole group thing comes along and you guys start copying each other. So you're setting up your environment to be successful, whether it's on a team or in your company in Polymath, or even at home. Talk about picking and choosing your friends and allies and how they're not always the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, I think it goes a long way with that balance component of your environment, right? So you've got those, how you want to interact with the world, and one of those areas is through the family, friends, and company you keep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a challenge because I think you gravitate towards either people who are completely polar opposite of you because they excite you, right? and that could be toxic. Um, if you don't know, if you don't understand the attraction, right?
Sure.
Or you gravitate towards people that are exactly like you, which creates these categories of things where everybody is doing the same thing, and they either are hyper competitive with one another, or they're going over there and they're perpetuating fallacies and bad behaviors or bad habits, and it's giving you an excuse to continue with those bad habits. So I really feel like it's, again, everything for me comes down to like this, and this is kind of my myopic, way of kind of looking at the world. It's portfolio approach, right? Like, I know that there are people around. I used to keep people around me, and like I'd have people around me all the time that I would just, I enjoyed just, looking for people who were interesting, people like I could interact with that had similar philosophies or different philosophies. Now it's more purposeful. It's like, it starts with, do we have a shared purpose, right? You can think of Stan McChrystal's Team of Teams, right? That concept of shared purpose, common consciousness, right? Common values. I'm not saying that we have to believe in the same God or we have to believe in the same politics. We have to have arrived at there because we had some commitment to a thought process to get to the right place, right? Like, there was a passion for arriving there, that there was an analytical thought behind it, which is why maybe we got to different places for the right reasons, right? For our own personal experiences. And so for me, it's about finding people who are committed to personal growth, committed to learning and being lifelong learners. I wrote an article about this, and it was about, I forget who, it was somebody else who I had read a book about it, and I don't want to misquote it, but it was essentially the theme of, that, stupid people talk about other people, and, mediocre people talk about events, and really smart people talk about ideas. And it's that concept, right? Like, I love the idea of like this idea that if the people who are in a room aren't passionate enough and they're self-aware enough and they're brave enough to be able to vocalize who they are and what they believe in and to know who they are and what they believe in, those are the people I want to associate with. And I don't care. They could be paupers or they could be billionaires, but if they know who they are and they know how to defend that, and they can have a conversation about it, I'm interested. I want to have a relationship with that person. And I think that's what it is. It's about those values, right? And it's those values of being committed to wanting to make a difference in a positive way, to not being afraid to communicate how you want to interact with the world, and not being afraid of what you hear from other people about how they want to interact with the world.
That's so true. I'm a big risk taker and go, and my wife is not. She's same job for over 2 decades, very consistent, very operational, and so one, it helps balance me out, and it took me a while to figure that out because whenever I would hang out with friends or date people that were big risk takers, it's like, oh shit, we got arrested again? How do we get here? It's
Yeah.
what the hell happened? So one, if you learn that about yourself, you can balance yourself out. When I was working at the hedge fund, the portfolio manager, we would meet every morning and talk about how we're going to open and close positions, and he would have his ideas, and I would agree or not agree, but I would just point out, what I thought, and then he corrected me one day. Well, asked me one day, he goes, "Hey, you can point out what you think, and I want that, but please tell me anything you think is completely wrong in my thinking. I want you to don't be a yes man. I need to understand where all my blind spots are because I have this approach, and if you don't see it that way, I got to hear it. Otherwise, I'm just going in this one direction. And so help me out." So he's a big Graham and Dodd value investor, Warren Buffett kind of guy, and I'm just a trader. And it was, I swear to God, man, it was that third bottom in '03. And when you hit a third bottom, it doesn't really make a new bottom, new low. In a technical analysis, it means you're probably setting a base now. And I go into his office and I'm like, "Hey, I think we're bottoming out this week again. I don't think being this exposed on the downside because we were really short. We were really net short. It was 200% invested,
Yeah.
and we were like 160 short. And I was like, hey, we're we're exposed here. And he's like, you don't know what you're talking about. I go, probably not, but this is what it looks like to me. And you told me to point this out. And so, but he did come back later and say, hey, thanks for pointing it out to me. Um, in your long term, I asked you, what do you want to do long term? And you just, not necessarily, well, maybe it's a broad answer, but he said, I'm a big fan of vision, a governing dynamic for why you do what you do, and then identifying opportunities and goals that move you forward. So my question is, what was the vision or the governing dynamic that said, hey, I swam across the Hudson, which is 3.5 miles, plus a shit ton of push-ups and running and pull-ups, etc. Let's get with a team and swim 21 miles across, God knows what, in cold temperature. Like, what is the thought process behind that next challenge? It wasn't like it was go from 3.5 miles in the Hudson to 5 miles. It's a big one, right? So
Yeah.
what's the need that needs to be met with these big physical challenges? It's not a criticism. I just want to know for you,
Uh,
what's the
I
deal?
mean, I mean, and I realize, so when you ask me about the 10-year goal, I have, I kind of give a bullshit answer there, which is, I don't really, I don't look, I look 10 year, I don't look 10 years down the road in most things, to the extent that probably I should or want to. I believe in, there's some things I want to accomplish from a vision standpoint in life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if there's opportunities and the stars align, and there's a need where what do I want to do in the next 10 years? It's very easy. I want to serve my family. I want to serve my country, and I want to I want to serve those people who supported me. That's the real answer. And how I do that and what that manifests into, um, to be determined. I mean, I have some ideas and thoughts, and you've seen, and I had mentioned that, you had mentioned in there in reference I ran for state representative and at one point, and considered some entree into politics in the state of Pennsylvania, and have entertained ideas of potentially what could that look like in public service, and that, and doing some things in politics, and what would it take for me to want to do that, and to be determined. Let's see what the next 10 years of our country's landscape holds. When it comes to physical challenges, um, it started with, I wanted to do the swim for the SEAL swim because it was something that the stars aligned.
Yep.
The stars aligned. I'm a swimmer by background. It was challenging because it was something that I knew would be, I could do it, but it was something I haven't done in a while, and I wanted to get back into it, and it would challenge me physically. Uh, and it built a tremendous level of resiliency mentally that has, again, transferred into a lot of different things in life. And I kind of look at it in my brain. It's kind of like the Panama Canal, right? Like you transform and you grow, and how the canal raises and there's these locks.
Yep.
So doing that race, I went here and I transformed and I locked it in. I'm never going back. So now it's like, what's the next thing I can do where I can lock it in and never go back? And I love the idea of the English Channel, because it's going to be challenging. It's going to challenge you mentally, physically. It's going to challenge. It's going to you have to just looking at. I'm going to be doing cold baths and cold training every week, ice baths for the next year to be able to train my breathing, train my heart. But what does that translate into? I'll guarantee. I mean, my heart health is going to be through the freaking roof. I'm going to be able to know and understand my heart better than I ever would have understood it if I didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to understand how to control my breathing. I'm going to understand how to control my body under stress and under duress. I'm going to have to teach myself even more discipline as it relates to focus, and it relates to mental stamina. The ability to sit down. I told you, it was like, this is a challenge sometimes, sitting here, for a couple of hours, whatever it is, feeling that urge to want to get up and go. And you can't do that in a pool. You got to just keep going, and you got to do it in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And so the answer was, it was the biggest thing I could think of that I could do in the next 2 years, year and a half, 2 years, that excited me, and that I could see it having benefit in multiple areas of my life.
Gotcha.
So and I felt like it was a benefit that I could lock in. Like I love the idea of like high impact, like we talk about like what we do with professional service, right? High impact services, high impact solutions. How do we go over there and we make an impact in column A that transfers into column B and C? And this was the one that cut across everything. In a year when we talk, I'm gonna. I mean, a lot less shit will phase me in a year than it does now,
Sure.
just by virtue of doing that. And it's the same kind of concept.
Got it.
Also, also there was less chance of getting bit by a shark in the English Channel than there was swimming doing the Alcatraz swim. So that was also the other thing.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we had Kenny Bigby on a seal, and he talked about the bull sharks that were in. I go, really? Because aren't those in the ocean? He goes, yeah. Well, they swim up to fresh water in the Hudson River. I was like, oh, no shit. And
Yeah.
then when you're doing Alcatraz, you're out, you're easily exposed to sharks out there. 21 miles. Are you doing the whole thing, or
No.
you said it's a relay?
So I want to do a three, and I'm trying to find some people to do it with me. So I'm hoping one of my ulterior motives of being on this podcast is any athletes who are listening to this who want to go over there and join a crew and training for doing this English Channel relay. I got some slots open.
I got you. I
So
got you.
yeah, we got to do. I want to get three.
Yeah.
So that would be 7 miles each person
Sure.
on the relay. Uh, there have been a total of, I believe, 1,092 swimmers since 1875 who have done the relays. So it's a very small amount who've done the relays. There's been about 2,000 who've done the full length over that same course. So when you combine it, you're looking at maybe 20 people a year who are either tackling the relay swim or the full thing.
Yeah.
I felt like 7 mile there and 7 miles. The 3-in-1 relay, 2-in-1 relay, and 1-in-1. Those are like the official relays where you can be timed and in the history books of doing the English Channel.
Gotcha.
And you got to be. It's also. I was looking at how long do I really want to spend in the water freezing my ass off. So
Long time, right?
7 miles seem like about the extent that I want to freeze.
Yeah. So the episode we recorded last week, it'll drop right before yours, and there's like a 3 week lag. And so we had the
Right.
Kathys on, Kathy Hartwell and Kathy Remington. Kathy Remington and Hartwell both swam the New York City SEAL Swim.
I know Kathy. We were in the bus together. She's great. Kathy Remington and I
So
were.
she's the
Yeah, she's
62-year-old lady wearing green that day.
yeah, yeah,
Former Marine. Her dad
yeah,
was a Hall of Fame swimmer. She's 62, weighs 125 pounds, and she
yeah,
swam the whole thing with no fins.
yeah. She was. So we were on the bus. If you look at one of the pictures I sent you, we were sitting. Kathy and I were sitting on the barge at the far corner, and we were on the bus trying to decide if we could stage a coup to not have to wear fins during the event because
Mm,
we were told you had to wear fins.
sure.
And Kathy was like, I don't think we do. She's like, I don't have to wear them. We're not going to wear them. And I was a little bit more, I was a little bit more of a rule follower. It was my first year doing it. I didn't want to get kicked out of the water.
Sure.
So yeah, by this time we got on the barge, she's like, I did it. She's like, I just chucked the fin. She's like, and went for it. She's like, and no one bothered me.
Right.
And I'm like, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she's awesome.
She's so generous too. Like she has this bead store. Have you heard about this?
Yep.
And she made my wife a bead bracelet that same night and sent it to me already. Super kind. Hartwell's taller. She's like 6 feet tall, triathlete, and she likes doing the Lake Placid triathlon. She likes being in the cold. She's fucked up, right? So she likes the
Yeah.
cold water. So I think one of those two, because they're both competing in world championships for half Ironman.
I I actually on my Facebook page, I specifically, I believe, called out Kathy Remington on having her do the race
Right.
to the English. We talked about it when we were there. So we talked about it on the bus, and I was trying to see if she would do it. And she responded with something on my page, but I don't know if it was a yes yet. But
Gotcha.
maybe I'll reping her again and see if I can get her to go in on doing this.
I had a technical question about that. I know you have obligations tonight, but you swim freestyle the whole way, or you just you recover with side stroke at all or breaststroke?
So it depends. So if I'm doing it with no fins, then I'm
No,
going to recover.
I meant the seal swim. Sorry.
Oh, so on the seal swim, I would recover a little bit with backstroke if I needed to.
Okay, gotcha.
And usually I would do that to stretch my calves so that I would avoid a spasm.
Yeah. Yep.
So again, this comes down to like really knowing your body. Like you can tell when you got to start like you get to that point where you know if your calves are going to lock up, right, or
Hmm.
you're going to have a muscle spasm, and that's the worst thing that can happen in the water because you can't unkink that, right?
Right.
There's no pressure, gravity. You're going against waves, so you can't move your foot. You're in the right direction. So I mean, when I train, that's how I train as well. So when I train for any endurance
Yeah.
swims, I build in intervals, right? In the beginning, talking about swimming, right? First thing I do for me personally, I love the idea of breaking down my stroke and breaking down to basic. So I took 3 weeks off after the seal swim. I just flat out took 3 weeks off. After that, when I got back in the water, first amount of, mind you, I usually do in a 25-meter pool. I'm doing 300, 400 laps when I'm in the pool at each session. When I jumped back in, I did 25, and that was it. And I left the gym. Monday did that. Wednesday went back in the pool, did 20, did 30. Friday did 35, and I'll build my way back up, and I break down because every time you do that, you're going to dial. You only got 25 laps, and you're used to swimming 300, 400. You're going to dial in on some part of your stroke that you've not dialed in on before.
Right.
And then what I do is I do intervals for recovery. So I'll set my intervals, and then as we get closer to an event, I'll tighten my intervals up. So let's say it's in the beginning, maybe it's every 10 laps, I'll do a 2-lap recovery. Then by the end, when we get towards a race, maybe it's every 40 or 50 laps, and then I'll do a 4-lap recovery. And by doing that, and it's just building up, knowing how far you can push your body before you need to do some sort of a recovery lap
Yep.
or something to just.
Yep.
And with the Hudson swim in particular, it's not too bad because you're not doing 3.5 straight with no break. So there is less likelihood of getting cramps and stuff. Because you got that like half mile and then a mile, and you go, so you get the opportunity to stretch it out or work out any kinks.
Yep.
But it's the same thing. It's like you got to just kind of figure out the currents could be stronger. You could just have not stretched properly that day when you were running. You messed something up and you need to figure it out. So on a fin swim, I'll do backstroke. If I'm not using fins, then I'll do breaststroke.
Gotcha. Um, I have for me, it's a hard question. How hard it would be for you. They say your brain isn't really fully developed until about age 25, right? And when I left high school to go to Purdue, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was leaning towards business, but I was really good at math and science, so I wanted to go to engineering. So I went engineering, and I hated it from the get-go. And 3 semesters later, I was invited not to return to engineering. I was invited to pick a different school. So I transferred to Purdue's business school, and all right, cool, good to go. Happy about it. But I was 18, and then I'm in business, but I'm still missing this physical component that I wanted for most of my life and had some of it in high school. But I didn't go to any businesses that was physically related. Like even construction management would have been better. I've been doing something physical sometimes.
Yeah.
So fast forward, I'm in my 30s, and I'm 300 plus pounds, and not 300 plus pounds and strong. I'm 300 plus pounds and fat, and can't breathe, and all this. And I decided, I want to be more physical, so I do all these things to lose weight, get stronger. Running, P90X, CrossFit, you name it. And you're talking about how you have done a number of things, almost these different lifestyles. When that, hey, maybe it's public service, maybe it's you're teaching, but also you run your own. You're working for a big company, but now you run your own firm. If you're an athlete or you're a person that's trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, right? Do you have 1 or 2 or 3 questions that helps you figure out your identity on what you should be doing next? Because if you can answer that question, man, everything else is super easy. But I think it takes a while for you to learn about who you are as a person and what you want, so then you can decide what I want to do, or even who you want to be with, right? But if you can point out some questions that, whether you're thinking professionally or athletically, like, hey, if you can answer these questions honestly with yourself, you got a better shot because that's something I could have really used when I was, years ago.
No, and I mean, I'll tell you, and I mean, similar to what you just said. I mean, I look at it, and you say 25, and that's when your brain's fully developed. I'm 41. I don't think my brain's fully developed. So,
Right.
but
Shit, I'm still learning a whole bunch
yeah,
of things, right?
figuring that shit out. But I mean, no, honestly, I mean, what's helped me is the idea of, I think that identity comes from a hybrid of that active listening. It's active listening of both your internal compass and the external feedback you have from others, right? So I really do think that it does come back to the first. It's like accept the fact that there is only so many ways. It's like a chessboard. Our world's a chessboard. There are only so many ways in which you get to be impactful in this world. One of those is through your body. One of those is through your mind. One of those is through the value you create in business or public service. One of those is through the relationships you create. And I think it starts with you accept that. And then I think the next part is you actually start to ask yourself those questions in a very simple way. It's really simple. What kind of friend do I want to be? What kind of son do I want to be? What kind of brother do I want to be? What kind of spouse do I want to be? What kind of athlete do I want to be? Then it's, being.
Gotcha.
What kind of, you're working through it. What kind of person do I want to be spiritually? How do I want to be known as a Christian? Am I a Christian? Am I a Muslim? Am I something else? Like, do I believe in God? Do I not? It could be as very simple as that, right? Starting with being, do I believe in God or do I not? And if I don't, do I want to? Now you set yourself up for a journey for discovery, right? If you don't, you set yourself up for a different journey of discovery. Same thing, with athleticism, who you want to be in it. That's why you talked about, having that kind of lull in your life where, you were working, that imbalance, right? Where you were at a point where you were not maybe 100% happy with where you were physically. And then you brought yourself into it and transformed yourself. And I'll tell you, and I mentioned this a little, like for me, we talked about trigger points, and that was one of them for me as well. In a little bit of a different way. So when I was, like I said, I'm a super hyperactive person. And when I was a kid, I was very, very active. When I was in college, I was very, very active. And then I woke up, I was about 20 years old, and I woke up and my knee was swollen the size of a grapefruit. I couldn't get my jeans on. And my right knee was just swollen. And no one knew what was going on. And everyone was like, "Oh, well, when you were swimming, you must have went over there and hurt it on the board, or oh, you were working out, or you ran and you did something to it." I went to doctors for like 2.5, 3 years. They went in, they did knee surgery. Said, "Oh, it must be inflammation. You tore your meniscus." They removed all the inflammation. I thought everything would be fine. Next day, everything started to feel better. 2 days later, my knee swelled up just as bad as it was, like nothing ever happened.
Okay.
Then they're like, "Oh, you must have Lyme's disease. You got bit by a tick." All this crazy stuff. This went on for a few years. And I mean, so you imagine you go from being somebody who's incredibly physical, even when you're not physical, you're physical, right? Like you can't sit still it hurts to move. And thank God I went to a doctor at New York Presbyterian actually. And he looked at my fingernails and he saw that I had ridges, that my fingernails were getting ridges. And he said, "Oh, do your joints hurt?" And I said, "Yeah, my knee's swollen. They think it's gout. They think it's all this crazy stuff." And he goes, "No, you have psoriatic arthritis." So I was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis when I was in my early 20s. And, then they're like, "Oh, we're going to give you this medicine, methotrexate, and this stuff, which makes you nauseous. It's like a diluted form of chemo. It's crazy." And anti-inflammatories. So I went from feeling energized and young and strong and to feeling atrophied and tired and weak. And it was a mind fuck. I mean, I'm just part of, it really messed with my head.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, it messed with even when I got better, they gave me, I take a biologic, which is, medication that helps, it put it completely in remission. So I went from, I took Humira, which is like, there's a golfer who takes that, and some other people have psoriatic arthritis and advertised it, but it's an injection and it suppresses your immune system a little bit. But they did that within 3 days. It was like nothing ever happened. It was like going from complete agony walking down the stairs to like nothing.
Mm.
But in my mind, and it worked for a while. It was good. And then they had to change me to a different medicines. It stopped working after a couple of years. So I went through several years where I was afraid to push myself physically. I would still work out and I would do things and I would be active, but I was afraid to tackle big events or to tackle anything that I was worried could throw me back into a place that I didn't want to be. And, it became its own cage. And so it is about like that mindset of like defining yourself by something. So if you're I go back to this, it's like you're an athlete who no longer wants maybe you didn't make pro, or maybe you're not going to go, you're going to go a different direction, or you're trying to find your identity. And now that may be stripped away, or a portion of your identity stripped away because you're not doing that thing. If you allow it to be stripped away, right? And I allowed it to for almost a decade. I lived in fear of. I went through this whole mindset mentally of, oh, I'm just one injection away from being crippled up and not being able to run down the street in my mind, to kind of overcoming that mentally by saying it doesn't matter what's going to happen tomorrow. It matters what you do today and how you handle what happens tomorrow. So it's like that could happen tomorrow. I could wake up and whatever medicine that they have me on now, I've been on biologics for 20 years. It could stop working. It's very possible that if that happened, that English Channel relay just got a hell of a lot harder, but I'm still doing it. Right. So it's like, I'm not going to live in fear of what may or may not happen in the future. I'm going to live for today with an eye towards tomorrow. And it's about knowing who you are and how you're going to handle adversity that gets you there. And I think that comes from that core, right? It's like a power core of like, how you want to interact with this world while you're here in the short time we have. How you want to interact with it, and that's how you're going to interact with it. And come hell or high water, you'll figure out a way to get there. And I think so. Asking yourselves those questions about how you want to interact with the world early and often will get you to the point of figuring out what you want to do in life later on.
That's huge. That's huge. I think another little piece of that is when you're striving to make managing partner at some firm, or you're trying to start on your soccer team, you need to obviously there's your habits, but when you decide, hey, this is the player I want to be, this is the person I want to be professionally, you have to go through some pain, some challenges, some adversity, so that you could then believe, you know what, I could still handle it. This medicine doesn't work tomorrow, I can still handle it. Why? Well, at this age, I've handled everything. I've always handled whatever's thrown at me at this point. I can handle it. Or I've had enough reps. I've been in front of enough clients. Get in front of this other big client, I'm not that worried because I've handled enough clients. Or I've handled enough tackles. I'm not worried about this next running back. So you need to have those mental reps to let you earn the confidence with all of it, right? Whenever I start worrying about that swim or anything else, it never helps me. It makes me give me more anxiety, or I get freaked out, and I'm like, whenever I just focus, hey, here's today's workout, focus on this next set, this next rep, this next length, I'm good. I need to look, what's going on in a year, so I'm making some plans, or this month, or even with the business, you need to have your planning and your feedback loop. But the more intentional and present I am in any of my training, it's exponentially better for me.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think it's really important once you identify those goals. I mean, I kind of look at it. I look at each year, I kind of do a mental vision session of like, how do I want to interact? I know kind of high level what I want to do with my life, what my principles of, what my purpose is, right? What my points of purpose are as a person, what I want to do and how I want to serve my family, my community, my business, myself. And now it's like, how do I dial into that a little bit more this year and do kind of a general's 10 annual planning session about, and map out those vision things. And then after that, I just try to I fall in love with the process of trying to have fun with finding a way to get there.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing, like the journey of it. Like, that's it. Like, I want to figure out It's like, I don't get paid overtime for this, right? I want to figure out the most efficient way, and I want to figure out the most efficient and fun way and rewarding way to me to get to where I want to go. Doing it a painful and hard way is going to be, you're going to experience pain during the process, and you're going to experience adversity no matter what. But it makes it a lot easier if it's by your design, right? Like, you created the feedback loop, you created the system, and you're getting into it, right? Like, it sucks. It sucks the other way when you're sitting there and you feel like you just did a race, and or you did an open water swim, or you did something, you did hundreds of laps, and now you're going back to basic, and you're like a white belt, and you're sitting there doing 20 laps in a pool, and that stinks,
Yep.
but it's fun.
Yep.
After the second time, you're like, oh, I'm going to try this thing, or I'm going to do that. It opens your mind to something you wouldn't even be thinking about if you were trying to think about swimming 500 laps and you were just going and going.
Yep.
So that period, that's kind of a recovery in of itself, right? That's a mental recovery. It's a reset of your discipline. And so I agree with what you're saying, is like that, just dialing in on like what you're going to do that day and fall in love with that workout or whatever you're doing that day. Figuring out a way in which that workout has I love finding lessons in workouts. That's my cool thing. Like, my thing that I think is really cool. Like, for me, I swim 3 days a week. I strength train and weightlift 3 days a week. I try to get fencing in once a week. And then I alternate fencing and skiing on the off seasons. My son and I love to ski. So I try to, like, what's the lesson I could learn? And this year it's going to be fun. Last year I wasn't as concerned about it. This year, maybe I'm going to go out without as many layers on when I go skiing, because I got to get used to the damn cold. And I'd rather go and do that. And for me, it's like, I'd rather go out and ski on a slope and go and have fun with my kid, and then go have a beer and nachos after and reward myself for a hard, a hard day on the slopes and freeze my butt off, than sitting in my bathtub in a freaking bathing suit, freezing my ass off with ice cubes, right?
Yep.
Accomplishes the same goal, but one's a heck of a, they're both painful, but one's a heck of a lot more fun and rewarding than the other. So I love the process of figuring out ways to do both. And that's kind of just been my philosophy, is like, figure out how to make it part of your DNA, what you're trying to accomplish, and not just make it a task.
Yep. Because, when you're doing 2 days, there's some pain there. How can you build it in your identity and enjoy it a little bit more? I can tell you it's different. Like, when I show up at the pool and there's a bunch of older folks who's swimming pretty decent, they're just going back and forth, and I sit down there and I put this little JBL speaker right next to my lane, and they're like, because it's silence in the pool area, and like, what are you doing? I go, I'm listening to country today. I don't know about you guys, but that's what we're listening to. They're like, well, no one's ever brought a radio here. I go, well, hi, my name's Jim. I bet you're glad to meet me. But it's weird.
There you go.
It's weird when I'm lifting with a couple of my guys. We listen to like montages of speeches from like Ray Lewis or David Goggins and Jocko. So it's weird, depending on the task, I might listen to something different. When you're training, what's something you listen to?
So I love all kinds of music, but I'm a big fan of hip hop. I really do like I like a lot of different hip hop artists. I like a lot of rock artists as well. And then I'll listen to, it's the same thing. Like, depending on what I'm doing, I'll listen to audiobooks, or I'll figure out in between. Like right now, again, kind of falling in love with that process with deciding to be deciding to be my firm's chairperson and its legal intern, and going to law school at the same time. I'm listening to case briefs in the pool.
Mm.
So I'm sitting there, and it's like double time. Like, it's boring, but it's better than white noise. After a certain amount of laps, and I get excited about the fact that, like, I kind of, in my mind, I feel like I'm in the Matrix, right? Like, when Neo gets plugged in and he gets to like learn kung fu off of a download.
Right.
I kind of feel like I'm in the same vibe, where it's like I plug in and I walk out of the pool and I'm like, I know twerks.
Right. That's funny. I was one of the questions I was going to ask. If you're so ADHD and your mind's always bouncing around, man, how do you quiet it? Because all you're doing is staring at a black line for an hour or longer, right? When you're swimming, it's like, oh my God, my head's everywhere. Well, now I'm not as proficient as you. I'm trying to do everything right and make it to the end of the length of the pool. What's you're sitting on a bucket list, but so this question is going to be for you and your wife only, no kids, and you got to go someplace on vacation you haven't been before, either one of you. Where would you go?
Oh, geez, I let my wife pick. I have decision fatigue at this point in life, so if she wherever she wants to go, that she's going to enjoy. But I mean, if I would love to go someplace, um, I'd love to go someplace historical. I don't know exactly where, but I'd like to go to someplace that has a lot of history,
Mm,
that has a story behind it.
sure.
I love walking in the footsteps of people in our past and getting to think through and visualize the creativity, just like visualizing where I'm at today and what it was before, is really exciting to me. Um,
Cool. How
so,
about a sports movie?
I was going to say Rocky, as I love Rocky. I love all the quotes in Rocky.
Yeah.
But and then it's more, I guess it's fitting for the sport I'm pursuing, and also just this, the tone of the conversation. But I watched A Young Woman in the Sea the other night on Disney,
Okay.
which is about Trudy Everly, who swam the first woman to swim the English Channel, and I just really enjoyed the movie. I mean, I didn't expect to. I thought it would be like one of these like over Disney-fied type of movies.
Yep.
Um, but I got locked into it. I thought it was kind of one of those things where it was just like really, you were able, it was more cerebral of an experience of just kind of like dialing in to try to think of what the mindset must have been of somebody in a time when no one had really done this, or not too many people had done this, where the technology, like, there's no technology back then. Like, you go now, there's like shark repellent, things that you can put on, and there's nothing. There's people lathering up with goose fat and jumping in and swimming 20 something miles with nothing else but, their wit and their grit. So, I mean, I thought it was a really, really good movie. Definitely worth watching.
Being a swimmer, I saw you put, the Olympics swimming, Michael Phelps. What about Ledecky? She's pretty sweet too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite like swimming moment in the Olympics? Because I know what mine would be.
I, you know, I honestly don't. I enjoy watching it, but I don't get into like, I really didn't get into like just watching like key moments or anything. So it would be hard for me to pinpoint.
So there's this relay, four-person relay, and the French were really good. I can't remember the year. And
Okay.
Phelps, I think, went off first, and Lezak was coming in was as anchor. And one of the guys on the U.S. team comparatively sucked, right? Still outstanding, right? Elite. And so they're behind, and Lezak's more than a length down on the last 50. And Michael Phelps needed this gold because he was going to set the record that year for most gold medals. And without this team relay, it doesn't happen. And you can see their faces, and they're just like kind of like dejected already, like, oh shit, it's not going to happen. And the French were talking a lot of shit going in this race, and Lezak pulled him down at the end, and Phelps was just like, his arms out. It was just awesome. You have a favorite book?
I mean, I usually it's whatever I'm reading at the moment.
Sure.
Right now I'm reading a book, Extreme Ownership. So that was one that I was reading,
Yep.
which is a Navy SEAL book. I read there was a few others that I really enjoyed, but that was one that was, in particular, just something that was, pretty interesting.
For sure. Jocko has a great way about taking important concepts in leadership and really simplifying them so it's executable. You have a favorite superhero or villain? It could be real or real life or imaginary or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan. Like I said, I was a fan of Superman, but I became a much bigger fan of Professor X and Iron Man as I got older, and that still holds true.
And then for the villain,
I always found the story of Magneto pretty interesting. Um, just the raw power that he had, and then later, even though misguided, the level of self discipline he had, and he was kind of like the alter ego of Professor X, and it was kind of like gives you a good story of like how people's intentions and people's paths can put them at adversity with one another without because of not really understanding where the other one comes from, kind of thing.
that's huge. Like Marvel's big on that. They build the background of the villains so they're sympathetic. Not everyone does that. That's my German Shepherd losing her mind right now. You have a favorite lift?
Bench press for sure.
Okay. I know you like doing cardio. Do you have a favorite quote?
I do, yeah. One of my favorite quotes. I love Winston Churchill.
Mm,
I think he's again one of those people who is just another kind of polymath person, has a great diverse background. I've always liked the quote that success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts.
that's right. Yeah, don't get too high in the highs, too low in the lows. Keep going forward. And Churchill will say, going from event to event to event without like being pissed off, still just maintaining your composure and being enthusiastic. Is huge. Um, where can people find you uh, in the internet world or physically?
Yeah, I mean, in the internet world, they can find me on my LinkedIn. They can find me on Speaker Hub. I do a lot of public speaking, so always happy to go to events. And or on our website at polymathpartners.com. You can click on my bio, and you could contact me there.
Gotcha.
In the real world, always bouncing around. I go to a lot of different events in Washington, New York. Poconos. I live in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. I love it here. It gives me kind of that. I wrote the story on our website as to why we have an office here, which was an excuse as to why I'm not going to move. Which is I love the idea of having access to New York City and to these different urban hubs, but being a little bit removed and keeps me grounded and keeps me focused on what matters in life to me, which is my family, my friends, and my community.
That's awesome. I went on your site and it's telling that he has a number of blog posts, which isn't anything special for a business. Plenty of businesses have that, and his business is finance, investments, advice, consulting, legals, and I see articles on revolutionizing professional services for the America's front line, and he talks about uh, in one of the blogs, running on empty, how the 10-3-2-1 method charges you for success. So he talks about how to recover. And then does an article on the power of adaptability in the face of change. How do you handle adversity? And he talks about the swimming. So it's a financial background, and his two of his blog posts right there are just about being physical and how do you handle things. So I love how you tie it all in together about relationships, your mindset, how you interact with the world physically, and then spiritually, and how you grow. So you seem to have a lot of the questions answered for yourself right now. The questions probably change every year, but you're doing great things there, and we're really glad to have had you on today.
I really appreciate it, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. And if anybody who's listening wants to do a 7 miles in the English Channel in 9 months, give me a call.
Gotcha. Perfect. For those that send out questions, email the show at info@athlete-builder.com. And my book just went live recently, so it's out for pre-order. Athlete Builder, the blueprint to build champion athletes. So I write out, here's the processes, doing the same things that James and I talked about today, but geared towards athletes and coaches. So check that out. And it'll be out in time for Christmas, which makes a great Christmas gift. So James, appreciate it. Thanks for being on the show. And until next time, best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For sure.